Well, welcome everybody to today's Capstone Defense. It's a special day because this is our 177th Capstone Defense, actually. Today, Jenica Middleton will defend her Capstone manuscript on the bedrock of organization transformation, examining the relationship between leadership, culture, and communication in successful change management. Her supervisor is Professor Jackie Hornweg, and her second reader is Dr. Terry Flynn. I'm the chair of the jury today, and we will be listening to you during the 25 minutes that you will present to us for. Afterwards, there'll be 2 rounds of questions. The first round will start with your supervisor, Professor Hornweg, followed by your second reader, Dr. Flynn. I have the right to ask a question as chair, should I wish to. I don't have to. I haven't read your manuscript, so my question will be just based on what I hear during your presentation. And then we'll go through a second round following the same order. At the end of that round, we will take a pause, and Terry will put you and the gallery, which looks like it's just one other person, into a room. The jury will deliberate for probably 5 to 7 minutes, and then come back with a decision. Right. I forgot to mention, for those in the gallery, you're allowed to ask questions. So sharpen your pencil, and at the end of the questions from the official examiners, you're allowed to ask questions or make comments yourself. So do feel free to do that should you wish to. Okay, without further ado, it's let's say it's 8:06, which gives
Hold on, pause for a second, just wait.
As soon as perfect.
We'll start. Yeah, you got from 8:12. So we'll give you 25 minutes after 8:12, which puts you 37. So go for it.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited to share my capstone research with you titled The Bedrock of Organization Transformation, examining the relationship between leadership, culture, and communication in successful change management. Today we'll cover the reason for the study, the research problem, literature review that informed the study, research methodology, results and recommendations, limitations and future research, and lastly, how the findings will be shared. Then we'll move on to some questions. So this research transpired because I watched and participated in the panic the 2020 pandemic caused organizations to change how they did business. Now in 2023, companies are responding to climate change, technology innovations, the Russia-Ukraine war, inflation, and a skills shortage. So the necessity of change is visible. And PwC's annual CEO survey found that 40% of global CEOs think their organization will no longer be economically viable in 10 years' time if it continues on its current course. We know that change is essential to long-term company success, but it's become so commonplace that people struggle with change, large-scale resistance is accepted. And I thought there had to be a better way that communication could improve change management results.
Hey Jenica, I think your slides aren't advancing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
It's there? You're on the research problem slide?
Oh, it is, yeah.
Correct.
Perfect. So I wanted to find out how and to what extent can an effective communication function determine change management success? My first research question looks at communications as a foundational element that positions stakeholders for change by supporting leadership and building a change culture. Secondly, despite frameworks that tell us how things should be done, most times competing factors intervene and throw plans off course. So the second research question looks at what barriers exist in practical applications and how communicators push through for change management success. The final research question looks at how communicators can assist and train leaders to enhance their communication skills for better organizational alignment, stakeholder relationships, and positive change management. The literature reviewed 4 main themes: internal communication, engagement and advocacy, relationship management and the role of leadership, and change management.
It's still not advancing.
I think that just might be a delay.
Okay. Yeah, it's still on the research. Okay, now.
Yeah, I think it's just a delay. So Men and You talked about how symmetrical communication frames cognitive and emotional culture, which Men later added to this research with Sung by saying that when positive culture fills employees' needs, it strengthens employee organization relationships built on trust, transparency, and accountability, which Men and You tell us creates reciprocity, where employees are willing to perform tasks beyond their job description, which is a necessity during organizational change. Lemon and Palanchar contributed 6 ideas that defined employee engagement, which is that the work must create value, build connection, contribute beyond basic job responsibilities, and the employee must be given freedom to work at their vocation with the opportunity for experiences beyond strictly work within the organization. You said that leaders who operate on Lemon and Palanchar's engagement principles, coupled with emotional support, assist employees with accepting and committing to organizational change. Men and You said that communicator support to leadership is twofold. First, that communicators must coach leaders on best communication practices that identify and respond to employees' concerns. And secondly, that communicators should be involved in decision-making to ensure that an employee-centered symmetrical communication system exists where trust, reciprocity, employee feedback, and voice are highly valued. Salatis also talked about the importance of leadership developing a culture where change is embraced and accepted as a strategic necessity. And lastly, Ferraro spoke about the 8 reasons employees resist change, which is that employees may not understand why the change is necessary or the future vision. Variables that may stop or propel the change may not have been considered. The right stakeholders may not have been part of the discussion early enough, and therefore their concerns weren't heard. Benefits of the change may not have been communicated. An overall lack of communication surrounding the change's progress may have existed. An appropriate measurement wasn't introduced to track the change and determine its overall success. So the literature said communication should be both formal for sharing organizational information about change and informal for capturing emotional connection around change. So my study had 2 methodologies: a survey to identify formal informational results and 30-minute interviews to understand change management perception. Data was then triangulated against communications and change management literature to evaluate different theoretical approaches. Non-probability sampling was used to recruit participants, and social media, along with professional networks such as CPRS, IBC, and the Association of Change Management Professionals, were used to share the message about participation in my study. Research participants were recruited if they identified as mid or senior level communicators or PR professionals with Canadian experience planning or implementing organizational change management initiatives within the past 5 years. The survey was anonymous from the point of data collection, while interviews were transcribed and anonymized before analysis. Between February and May, data was collected from 34 survey respondents and 10 interviews. Survey results were reviewed using a categorical data analysis with descriptive statistics, while interview transcripts were examined using a qualitative textual analysis that looks for patterns along with direct quotes for color commentary. So the most common type of change among participants is technological transformations, such as ERP or SAP software, followed by organizational restructuring. 50% of the changes took 2 to 3 years to implement, with an average of 6 stakeholders per project. The interviews included representation from agriculture, education, energy, government, healthcare, and retail industries. Only 70% of respondents classified their organizational change as somewhat successful. Survey respondents ranked leadership as the primary indicator of change management success, followed by communications, and finally culture. The top value communicators offer change management is their connection and relationship with senior leaders. Communicators were referenced as strategic trusted advisors with an understanding of audience needs. Participants described organizational culture as transparent, authentic, ethical, engaged, and feedback-oriented. Most respondents did not characterize their organizations as change-oriented and noted an overarching sense of distrust. The contrast between survey respondents believing organizations are transparent and feedback-oriented while also showing a sense of distrust poses questions around authenticity. This suggests that the way symmetrical communication is being executed may lean towards performative rather than functional communication during change management, which the literature tells us that it creates negative associations with change, hindering engagement, adoption, and creating poor organizational culture. So one interview participant said it best. They said leadership often knows about changes so much before everybody else. So they have time to wrap their heads around it, and then they introduce it and they're like, well, why aren't you guys getting it? But they don't realize they've had lots of time to absorb it and then expect people just to keep changing. And sometimes they haven't even gotten through the last change because, of course, we're just rolling changes on top of changes. And that's why it's so important to have a change culture. Most organizations in the study did not communicate risks of the change, despite a culture of risk management. This breaks trust and destroys emotional culture. The Association of Change Management Professionals says that effective change occurs when the perceived risk is minimized and benefits are achieved. Without properly identifying project risks and perceived risks through symmetrical communication, effective change can't be realized. When leadership omits risks and solely focuses on the benefits, it creates an idealist vision rather than reality. And this suggests that perhaps change resistance is rooted in the disparity between what was promoted about the change versus what actually happened. And more than half of respondents also indicated stakeholder appreciation is not communicated. Yet Einwiller noted that appreciation is the #1 contributor to engagement. Beyond notes of thanks, Jiang and Men explain that appreciation may be shown through stakeholder empowerment, decision involvement, and information sharing. Poor communication on risks and appreciation indicates problems with the larger emotional culture, which may have contributed to a delayed mindset adoption in the organization studied. Most respondents understand the importance of requesting feedback during and after a change, but gathering feedback prior to the change could be improved. This suggests higher importance on the pre-change conversation to create understanding and set stakeholders up for how the change will take place, both in action and emotional support. Each change project used a wide array of tactics, often similar ones. This suggests that execution is less important than the backbone the project sits on: organizational culture, leadership, and history. Moving on to the second research question results. The study participants noted a lack of leader support, early stakeholder engagement, and action to mitigate concerns, which is consistent with Ferraro's 8 reasons for resisting change. This suggests an inauthenticity in stakeholder collaboration and commitment to the change. Yu advises that internal communication gives stakeholders representation and the chance to feel in control of organizational changes. So denying stakeholders that opportunity modifies the organization's stakeholder dynamic. One interview participant said the business reasons for change were sound, and they didn't argue with that. They just didn't like that we did it to them, not with them. Strategies to mitigate barriers followed both a dialogic and formal method, with stronger weight given to formal internal communication. By focusing efforts on formal communication, Lemon tells us that organizations are missing the link that creates engagement with change, and strategic communication efforts may not be successful. A common stakeholder engagement method among participants included the use of one-to-one meeting with executives to get project support, understand pain points, and strategize approach, but also to meet one-on-one with stakeholders who are struggling to adopt to the change. As well, the use of internal ambassadors assisted in cascading the message and supporting change uptake. Other communication and engagement tactics included signing off on roles and responsibilities, online gamification strategies, and publishing change newsletters or websites where stakeholders could retrieve important information without relying on the organizational cascade. Moving on to the third research questions results. During change management, communication support to leadership, as shown in the graph, includes providing informational, promotional, and connection opportunities for leaders. The research suggests that communications may be able to offer additional value by training leaders in how to better take advantage of meeting opportunities through emotional and relational communications and positive reinforcement behaviors. Communicators may provide coaching and leadership training throughout change management. Despite this support, respondents thought that leadership didn't value their environmental scanning efforts. Leadership support largely resembled informational and tactical means in the study, which indicates improvement in coaching relationship building communication practices. U discusses transformational leaders who build trust through emotional support, while Thelen mentions the importance of servant leaders encouraging stakeholder discussion. Both leadership styles require authentic leadership to build trust and engagement. By offering support that builds leaders as relationship managers, it creates a stronger communication network within the organization and positions communicators as strategic partners rather than tacticians. So the research suggests that communicators are boundless strategic partners, influencers, advocates, and connectors who have cultivated relationships based on trust, particularly with senior leadership. One interview participant said it best, that communication is a two-way dialogue where there is this intention to create not just an understanding, but to influence behavior because we're not bound by verticals or departments. To make sure that the information in the experiences and the resistance or the excitement doesn't live just where it happens, but you help connect the way people are acting, what they're doing, what they don't want to do, what they do want to do, with that kind of strategic intention to go through all of these pieces. Your role is to say, I've heard something over here. It's important. So the eye-opening part of this research was when the results showed that success didn't simply come down to good communication, but it was about the interconnected nature of communication with culture and leadership as well. I created the model shown on your screen to demonstrate this relationship. So central to the change management success model is leadership, which is responsible to funnel the change throughout the organization from start to finish. Communicators use environmental scanning activities to bring up insights to leadership that help inform strategy. Symmetrical communication uses both formal and dialogic methods to build trust, which is foundational for a positive organizational culture. Leadership then uses the information gathered from environmental scanning and symmetrical communication tools to create both a cognitive and emotional culture. The organizational culture determines stakeholders' association with change and whether they will support or resist efforts. Meanwhile, leadership is also collaborating and engaging with stakeholders using symmetrical communication to understand the concerns, risks, and benefits of different groups. Authentic stakeholder collaboration ensures that after listening and gathering information, leadership supports and actions the organizational change in a way that preserves stakeholder relationships. If stakeholder needs are met, they too will support and action the change. The model is cyclical in that every action moves its way through the different stages, sometimes in tandem with the success rate fed back to leadership through environmental scanning. The model does not vary through the different stages of change management because the research indicated that stakeholder collaboration is important at every phase, culture must be continuously built, and communication needs are perpetual. But the focus within each category is fluid, responding to changing stakeholder requirements identified through feedback mechanisms. The model also demonstrates the necessity of communication within change management because without it, leadership doesn't have the tools to set the stage for positive stakeholder engagement and adoption of change. So that leads me into my first recommendation, which is cultivate an emotional culture. Both the literature and research talked about the importance of culture in creating an openness to change. Culture indicates how stakeholders should feel and act in different situations. When change is introduced that creates uncertainty, stakeholders fall back on culture to tell them how they should react. The communication strategy should shift from solely informational to tap into the emotional culture of an organization. Communicators can also support leadership in understanding the reality of organizational culture rather than what organizations promote as their culture through environmental scanning. Once the current culture is understood, communicators may offer how the culture may impact change success and provide recommendations on how to reduce risks and shift that culture over time. Resistance is a feeling, and the research shows that solely focusing on informational communication, such as mission, vision, values, does not do enough to mitigate the risk. Emotional culture should be continuously cultivated and not focused on solely during change management. Communicators can assist in building a culture based on trust, transparency, authenticity, and empowerment with symmetrical communication. My second recommendation is that organizations should partner with communicators for strategic insights. So there's a disconnect between the type of support communicators believe they can offer leaders and what's actually produced in practice. The research found that communication support is largely tactical, such as key point summaries, email templates, and reports, but leadership isn't receiving top value from communicators in this manner. And actually, most of the respondents in my study were senior communicators. So communicators must then educate leadership on their offerings to be given the opportunity to showcase strategic talent. And the first step is bringing communications into the discussion from the start, not once the idea has already been formulated. Without access, it takes longer to build understanding and develop relationships. My third recommendation is to engage in authentic stakeholder collaboration during planning. Research results suggested stakeholder collaboration in organizations were mainly performative. Yet all study participants noted the importance of proper discussion among stakeholders, which suggests that leadership may stop true symmetrical communication. By taking away the opportunity for discussion, stakeholders feel resentment when changes happen to them, solidifying a negative emotional culture. Concerns must be heard, validated, and acted upon. Stakeholders should also feel appreciation for participating in the discussion. Successful change management relies on strong leaders who believe in the initiative, two-way symmetrical communication that involves stakeholders from the start, and an organizational focus on positive informational and emotional culture building. So Stacks tells us that non-probability sampling methods can't be generalized to the larger population. In this study, results represented views of a subset of communicators and change management professionals. While efforts were made to obtain input from every province in Canada, affiliations with MCM and local communications association chapters may have skewed results towards views primarily held within Ontario and Alberta. Additionally, a few survey questions asked participants to describe the value of communications. These results may be biased because communicators were assessing their own value. Future researchers may wish to question senior organizational leaders on the value of communications and change management for more accurate data. Further research is needed to explore the disparity between the perception and misperception of organizational transparency. Is authentic transparency necessary, or has transparency become a buzzword with a similar effect? What is the appropriate amount of transparency to obtain change acceptance and trust? Study results also revealed a belief that leadership does not recognize the value of environmental scanning. Future scholars may wish to interview leadership to understand what information they believe is important to highlight and act upon, and how they want that information presented and when. As well, the literature noted the importance of dialogic communication in building an environment of trust and stakeholder engagement. Research could explore the ideal formula for the split between dialogic and formal communication to obtain success in change management. So in September, I have the opportunity to share the results of my research beyond the communications community, as I will be doing a webinar for the Association of Change Management Professionals Manitoba chapter. My hope is this helps to break down the barrier that sometimes exists when communicators and change management professionals work together, as it surfaced during my research study. Beyond that, I would like to explore publication potentially for a business type journal to further share the value of communications and change management, as well as pitch to a few conferences to share my research beyond those who already believe communication is important. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jenica, for your presentation. And now we will immediately go to questions. And your first questioner is jury member in your super thesis, your capstone supervisor, Professor Hornwick.
Thank you. Did you need a glass of water to drink? Maybe catch your breath. Congratulations. That was
Yeah.
fabulous. So much depth in that information that you presented, which really reflects the paper and that model. Wow. And so congratulations on that, first of all. And I'm going to start on your second recommendation and really ask you to talk to the role of the communicator within your model. Actually, can you just pop it back up, your recommendation for two?
Mhm.
Perfect. So this recommendation to partner with communicators. So really, maybe start by talking about what you really see as that valued role for what communicators, you talked about a lot about the environmental scanning and not just the tactical. If you can think about that role of communicators, and in particularly how communicators in partnership with leaders, so with the leadership, and also with those change management professionals, what does that partnership look like to you, and where does the communicator fit in that? What value do you see most heavily for the communication role?
Yeah, so I mean, I see that in reference to the model, that communicators are really acting as leadership coaches. So they're a coach in the sense that they can bring this information from the environmental scanning that helps them better make strategic decisions on how that change should move forwards. But also helping them understand a little bit on what's not actually said. Right. So the nonverbal communication and emotional intelligence, I think they can help a lot there, because that was really the part of the research that came out that leaders need a lot of help with. I mean, humans are difficult, right? And so if we can help them try to decipher how people will react in advance, I think that could give them some good insight. And then as far as change management professionals, the relationship there is guiding them into how best implement the tactical aspects to make sure that that project moves forwards. And so it gives them kind of that foundation for them to do their job.
Yeah, and I noticed in your paper, so thank you for that. And I noticed in your paper, you talked about, I thought it was kind of an aha moment in terms of that things falling into the performative versus the authentic. And maybe you can also talk a little bit about the communicator's role, like what would you recommend? And I'll have to say, I just also loved your insight about humans are difficult, and probably never more difficult than when they have to go through change, because, none of us like change. We all love change as long as it was happening to somebody else in the organization and not us. So it is, and we are going through, so many sectors are going through such tremendous change societally. We're going through so much change. But when you're going through that process as the communicator, how can you help to make sure that it isn't performative, that it really is authentic communication that's happening to support that change?
Yeah, I think really pushing leaders to help them realize that those discussions are important and they're not just something that needs to be done as like a box checking exercise, right? Because I think sometimes leadership feels that way, as, oh, we have to do this because it looks good, but we know we're actually going to do this way instead, right? And so helping them realize that even though they know what they think is the best way moving forwards, without having that discussion, they really don't know if it's going to be successful or not, or if that even is the best way. So I think it's really pushing for that. And I think the only way that that's push is going to be successful is if you've already built those relationships with leadership in the background, because then they trust that you know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So also demonstrating your competency, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then the other aha moment, I thought that was great, that quote that you had, the first quote, and sorry, I've just lost my train of thought here. So I'm going to switch to a different question because I've lost it. But so I guess I'm going to, you know what, I'm going to let Terry go and then I'll come back to it because I have a question. I've just lost my train of thought for a moment.
No worries. It happens when you're, about to hit that big number there, Jackie. Sometimes
It's
it's
true.
like,
I'm a year
I hit
away,
it all
just
the
so you
time.
know, I just had a birthday, so I'm a year away from that big number.
You're in your 60th year, though. Come on. So listen, Jenica. First of all, I think this is such a well-conceived study, a well-written argumentation of both the literature, but also your findings as well. And I really enjoy the path forward for both communicators and leaders that you set out in this. I do have a few questions. The first goes back to, if you can go to your methods slide for me as well, please. So, we always have to remember that these are, really well done master's capstones, right? Research projects. So they're not doctoral dissertations, but we always want to push people, for that. One of the things I think that's missing from the paper is a bit more description of the participants, both from the qualitative and from the quantitative. I think your readers would like to know, who are these people that are in. You don't have to talk about who they are as a person, but what kind of positions do they have? What kind of roles are they playing, so that they come with some level of more authority when we're quoting them as well. So I think that's an important part that you want to add to it. For your survey, I think you had a start rate of 71. We finish rate of 34. I'd also like to know, who are they? Did you gather some demographic information from them in terms of job titles or anything like that?
The only demographic type relation information from the survey was how many years experience they had, which basically said most of them were senior level, which was 10 plus years. Okay.
So I think, why did you have almost a 50% drop off rate then, do you think?
I think because going into it, I think it was the screening questions that really made people stop and think, did I identify with that? And I think part of it too was, so they were communications, the experience and the change management experience. And I think a lot of people do both of those things, but they don't necessarily identify with them. So for example, like I had reached out to the Change Management Association to get some survey respondents. And I think that helped drop it off a little bit, because they didn't necessarily think, oh, I'm a communicator, even though they do a ton of communications work in their role, right? And so I think the labels probably threw a lot of people off.
So maybe the change could be, are you involved in communications in a change management role?
Yeah.
Right. So that they don't seem that way. Okay. The second question I have is about your figure 10, your change management success model. And, I really, again, I like this, how you've really illustrated how these rules work together. One of the things that I think is missing here, and this is a positivistic perspective, right? You've sort of painted, here's the best path forward to be able to get to this success. One of the greatest barriers to success that research tells us from behavioral sciences is the notion of the rigidity of resistance within the change framework. And so how do you count for the level of resistance to change? Is that an antecedent to this model? Do you have to deal with that first as a communicator? Because if you don't deal with the resistance, you're not going to get them to that success. So tell me about your thoughts on how does this model, or how can this model reduce the level of rigidity of resistance to change?
Yeah, well, I think your point about should it be first is it really depends on the culture of the company first, right? As to where you're starting from. If you already have a change culture within the company where changes happen very frequently, they are really promoted by leadership as something that is necessary to move the organization forwards, necessary for them to keep their jobs. I mean, all of those things. If that culture is already there, this model is going to have a much higher success rate than a company that's already starting from that resistant culture, right? But I mean, no matter where you're starting, you have to be able to push through. And I think being able to push through comes from that discussion with the stakeholder collaboration with leaders on one-on-one in groups. And part of the communicator helping that leader is helping them to get to the bottom of why are these people resistant? What is it? Is it a past action that's made them resistant moving forwards? Is it a feeling that they personally have? And so helping understand why, then you can address that and move that forwards.
Okay. I think if you want to move forward with this as something that you know, positions you as a thought leader, I'd spend some more time and looking at the cognitive resistance factors that psychologists have really identified. And I'm happy to share with you some of the research I've done in that area that talks specifically about it as well.
Okay.
So I'll pass it over to you, Alex. You're
on
muted.
In the interest of time, I'll go back. Jackie, do you have any, did you remember your question that you wanted to ask, or?
I did, but if you have one, Alex, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Me go ahead? Okay, terrific. I was just going to talk about the steps of change, right? Because we know that people, from the time they understand, and this goes back to that quote that you had about leaders feel like, how come people aren't keeping up? Like I've explained the change. Can you talk a little bit about your insights from doing this research? And I know you just did so much on Lit Review as well, which really came through as you were talking about your results. Can you talk about some of that, you know, from the path that where people go from understanding that there's a need to change, recognizing what the change needs to be, but also internalizing how the change needs to happen within them to actually making the change? Did your research uncover anything in those steps that really speaks to that, that really great aha moment quote that you had included in your study, in your presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I also agree that that quote was kind of really even made me stop and think like, oh yeah, that's actually something that leaders are way down ahead and everyone's just trying to catch back up. And so I think the part of the key to that is building time in, but that's also a huge barrier as well, is that companies don't have time, right? And so it's almost like you're always going to be playing catch up then if you don't have that proper timeline, which is years and years for proper mindset and behavior change, right? So that also kind of lended itself to why the results showed that the participants didn't feel that their success was completely successful because they were only basing it off of the KPIs of the company. And so, sorry, what was the question again?
It was just really that insight into how you get from step one of understanding that there is a change and that you need to be part of that change to internalizing the change and being able to put that into practice in your own job, whatever that is within the organization. And how do we help people get there? And just the recognition that, you know, the soak time of that. Yeah.
So I think we need to give people the time to think on it themselves, but then also that time to talk about it with their manager, talk about it with their peers, and then come back and say, okay, here's what I think I know, but is that matching where the company is wanting to go, right? And then have that discussion to maybe see where the differences are and how we might be able to help those people to be on the same page. And then celebrating the wins, which comes back to that appreciation point about how it's the top contributor to engagement. So celebrating that and thanking people for being participants, but also the research talked about giving people an individual role in change management. So it's not just as a large group, we all need to do this. It's here's how you personally are going to be contributing to the success of this. And I think that really helps bring people along because they feel that they have value then.
Yeah, and I guess that also goes to just the role of leadership. Like there's leadership in terms of that person who's the president of the company, but there's also that first line supervisor who is your actual supervisor in terms of helping those teams come along, right? So good. Well, I do have more questions, but I know we're out of time, so I'm not going to ask any more.
Okay, well, thanks. Terry, did you have any further questions?
Yep. It's interesting, that whole time dimension, that, yeah, there are certain situations when organizations are forced into a change initiative because of market forces, acquisitions, different things like that. But I even think that the culture of change management doesn't build in enough time, even when you're looking at proactively, because this notion of soaking, letting people really truly sit with what this means profoundly. Psychologists, really said that this is it. If I can't understand what this change is all about, how it impacts me, and if I don't think time it, then I don't think it's authentic or I trust it. So I think that's a really important part of it. But the question I want to ask is, how come you're not on IABC Canada West conference for October? Because this should be in that. You should, I know that you're involved with IABC. We met at IABC Canada West conference. And so you should be presenting this. You should be thinking about CPRS as well for next year in Mont Tremblant. But this is something perfectly that practitioners are looking for. This is the kind of modeling and frameworks that you can really share with them that would be beneficial as well. But we're the headline sponsor at IBC Canada West, so come on, you got to pull those strings, get on that agenda.
And
okay, I'll think about it.
Can I just
they
add
already
to that?
have their agenda set though, don't they?
Yeah, well.
I was just going to add to that, as those who've taken the reputation course know, relevance is the new reputation. And I think Terry actually said this off the top. Everybody wasn't yet on the call, but like, this is just such a relevant topic that you chose, given the transformational change every sector is going through, the digital revolution that we're going through, so much change. And when you look at what you talked about off the top about where the change was, we just have a whole lot more of that's going to happen. So I will just echo what Terry said in terms of communicators need to hear about this. They need to understand the pieces. You had gamification, I thought was really interesting to see in those tactics, because gamification really gives people an opportunity to play with concepts. And if you think about, we talk about sometimes universal design for learning, which is that different people have different ways of engaging with information to process. And so it really is about finding those different ways to help them think. And I just think this topic, you've done such a great job off of the top in terms of tackling it. And there's just so many more layers in terms of next steps on this as well. And really important for so many industries right now.
That's great. Thank you, Jackie. Do we have any questions from the gallery? Laura.
Thank you. Hi, Jenica. Well done. I just have a very quick question for you. So my mind is always on a very large organization. So I'm going to need you to shift gears to that, to like the space that I find myself in. And to Terry's point, it's always a lot of acquisitions. It's big things. It's transformational change. It's technological change for 85,000 employees. So a lot of the time when large organizations go through transformational change, roles are filled by people with no formal change management or communications experience. a lot of the time they're also considered side of desk, and you kind of touched on it. You touched on the idea of change champions, where they find people who will help push out the message, but those people don't have formal training in communicating and connecting with individuals. So my question is, did anything come up through your survey, through your research, through conversations with folks that perhaps either change management should actually be owned by the public relations professionals, or alternatively, should change management be taken as seriously as public relations is and given a seat at the table from the get-go?
Yeah, interesting question. So what I did notice in some of my interviews is that the communications and the change management divisions were all moved under the same leader. And I think that was really important in having that collaboration between the two groups. No one commented on change management being at the table, but having said that, I mean, I think that's if the world is going to continue going the way that it is, and that things are going to have to keep changing at a really frequent pace, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it would be good to bring that voice into the conversation, to have both communications and change management there, to have their perspectives shared.
Any follow-up, Flora?
No, that was perfect. I'm not as good as the rest of you. I don't have my jury follow-up questions ready to go. I only had that one. Not going to scare you, Jenica. I've already been in your.
Oh, apparently some other people on this panel scare people.
No, I'll just know my question honestly just came from experience. I've had enough times as a communicator in a large organization where I end up sitting across from someone who has zero experience, and I'm like, you're the one leading the change. This is bonkers. So I was just interested if you had kind of crossed paths.
Thank you.
You're not scary, Terry. Just sometimes in the moment, like this one.
Good thing you're wearing pink today, Terry. Softened you up a little.
Any other questions from the gallery? None? Okay. So what we'll do now is Terry will put us into a room separate from, or maybe he'll put the everybody else into a room. Either way, the jury will be in a room by itself. We'll convene for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll be back.